Book 7, Book 8 today. Recap Book 7. So in Book 7, we discussed the phenomenon of acrasia. We said that when it comes to moral virtues, there are two components. There is knowledge, and there is desire. And acrasia can take place in either sense. So we have this thought of, we can imagine the kind of person that knows what the virtuous thing is, but doesn't desire to do it. So the person that knows they ought to donate to charity, but doesn't want to donate to charity. And as a result, she checks this knowledge box, but fails to check the desire box. Or by contrast, we can imagine the person that desires to do the right thing, they desire to be virtuous, but they genuinely just don't know what virtue demands of them. So for example, the person who desires to be temperate and they desire to consume the appropriate amount of food, but they don't know what that actually means for them. So as a result, they over or undereat. Both of these, Aristotle understands as different kinds of acrasia. And if we look at our spectrum of people, on the one hand, we have vicious people. On the other hand, we have virtuous people. And this middle section is full of people who experience acrasia. Okay? Full of people who experience acrasia. I pose to you that the vicious and the virtuous are theoretical limiters as opposed to practical states of being. And that I pose to you, and this is contentious naturally, that Aristotle does not genuinely think there is a vicious person out there. Aristotle presents two accounts of the vicious, which we'll get to next week. Person A is vicious in the true Disney villain sense of the word, in that they neither desire the good nor do they do what is good. They desire what is vicious and they do what is vicious. As a result, they are fully unified toward the bad. But he also presents another Disney style. He also presents another conception of the vicious person who desires what is good but really fails to achieve it. And this seems to bleed over to the acratic person. The same way I pose to you that I don't think Aristotle thinks that real people are genuinely virtuous. This is why in Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, when he does a case study on the virtuous, he appeals to King Priam. Whereas Priam was we can almost be certain, King Priam was a real person, he points towards someone of mythical status as an understanding of what virtue is. So most of us, perhaps all of us, we all experience the phenomenon of acrasia. And now we need to think about how do we divvy up this middle space. Okay? And this is, in large part, this and pleasure are going to be the focal points of Book 8. So Book 8 is going to focus on divvying up the kind, what it is like to experience acrasia and the kind of people that we are, depending on our relationship to acrasia, as well as our relationship to pleasure. Now, Aristotle is going to identify 4 different kinds of people. You have the virtuous, which Aristotle calls the phronomos. You have the continent person. You have the incontinent person. And then you have the vicious person. So these are our 4 categories of people, if you will. And to reiterate, this all goes back to knowledge as well as desire. So we could very easily create a chart here for understanding these kinds of people. So the virtuous person, they're unified. So we're going to have this kind of extra category of a unified. The virtuous person knows what is virtuous. They desire to do what is virtuous. And they act virtuously. Let's throw a 3rd category in here. Action. So the virtuous person knows what is virtuous, desires what is virtuous, they act virtuously, and as a result, they are fully unified. There is a kind of psychic harmony that the fully virtuous person, the phronimos, experiences. But we got to look at everyone else. I'm going to use the Disney villain understanding of the vicious person. They know what is wicked. They desire what is wicked, so we can even understand this as both positive and negative. They do the wicked thing, and the fully vicious person is also unified. They're just unified toward the bad. Now recall, for Aristotle, good and bad are not normative modifiers, rather good and bad are functional modifiers. So what it is to be good has nothing to do with conceptions of morality. What it is to be good for Aristotle is to be a good thing of a certain kind. So a good hammer, like we discussed when we went over book 2, is one that can drive nails into a wall efficiently. A good person is not one who does morally good things necessarily, but a good person is one who instantiates their distinctive human capacities of rational self-governance and understanding. Okay? So the vicious person, they're really good at being vicious. Okay? They know what is bad, they desire it, they do it, and there's a kind of unity that they experience there. But now we got the middle ground. This is the land of acrasia. This phenomenon of acrasia. This is where acrasia lives. Between continent and incontinent people. And when it comes to incontinent, Aristotle is going to flesh out 2 different varieties of incontinent. But what matters here for the continent and the incontinent is that there is no unification for both the continent or the incontinent person. There is no psychic harmony. Okay? Because the continent person, they know what is the good thing. Sometimes they desire what is the good thing. Sometimes they do the virtuous thing. Sometimes, but there's constant tension. Think about the person who wants to lose weight. They want to be temperate. Think about all the New Year's resolutioners. They want to be temperate. They want to be temperate, and they try to do the temperate thing, but they struggle. It's not organic for them. Okay? They have to force themselves to do the appropriate thing. But take the seasoned athlete or the seasoned gym goer. She does not struggle. She knows how much she should eat, how much she should exercise. She desires to do it, So she does it, okay? But the New Year's resolutioner, they falter in different ways. Maybe they know what they need to do, but they struggle to do it because they'd really rather have pizza and tacos. Or maybe they desire to be continent and they want to do what is temperate, but they just don't actually know what temperance demands of them. So these are two different ways in which we experience this phenomenon of acrasia. The difference between the continent and the incontinent person, so neither of them experience psychic harmony, but the difference between these two states is how much you get it right. So the continent person gets it right more often than the incontinent person. And incontinence, Aristotle is going to understand this as an internal struggle between logos and pathos. It is a struggle between reason and base appetite. Okay? And Aristotle thinks that the person who gives in to base appetite, the person who is led by their emotions, is worse than the person who tries to keep their emotions under control, their base appetites and desires under control, but nevertheless just struggles to do so. So for Aristotle, it is better to know what is good and to struggle to do it than it is to just give in to one's base desires. Aristotle is going to describe this fully vicious person in terms of bestiality. Now, he's not thinking about bestiality in the quite literal sense, so relations with an animal. But what he understands here as bestiality is this person who, forgive me, that should not be with the vicious person. That should be with the lower kind of incontinent. For the person who is led by pathos, or by their desires, by their, as Plato calls it, by their thumos, this person, Aristotle likens to bestiality. And the reason he does this has nothing to do with relations with non-human animals, but has everything to do with they are not acting in a human way. Okay, so if you return to our Scala Natura, if you think about the ladder of life that comes to be ascribed to Aristotle based on the De Anima, we as human beings, we share a lot in common with non-human animals and with plants. We have that nutritive soul that the plant does, the nutritive suke. We also have the affective suke, the one that is based on our desires or affects. The difference between us and non-human animals is we have the capacity for rational self-governance and understanding, whereas they do not. Okay. So what it is when Aristotle likens the person who is led by their emotions, by their desire for things, when Aristotle likens this person to bestiality, what he means here is this person is behaving more like an animal than they are like a human. Because no one gets mad at an animal when it is led by its desires. Because this is just what animals do. Animals cannot go on diets. You can train your dog to not eat until it's told to eat, but that's not dieting. Dieting is having an understanding of temperance as it relates to food, holding some beliefs and performing actions in conjunction with some belief. What your dog does when you train it to not eat until it's told is simply obedience. Okay. But throughout all of this, if we added another category, so I'm going to swap out this unification category for that of pleasure. Aristotle is not a prude. He's not a stickler. Pleasure is good. Okay? Aristotle has a role for pleasure in his conception of eudaimonia. The graph still applies here, because the person who is fully virtuous and the person who is vicious, they experience some kind of pleasure. Because the way Aristotle is going to understand pleasure, I'm going to erase this graph. The way Aristotle understands pleasure is not the same way we understand pleasure. So let's think of this concept of pleasure. Or in Greek, hedone. Forget a word, hedonic. So when we think of pleasure contemporarily, we tend to think of two things. We think of sensation, but we also think of psychic states. So it feels good, sensation. It feels good to eat your favorite meal, whatever that may be. There is a certain qualia, to use contemporary language, a certain subjective fact, perhaps, a certain feeling of what it is like for you to ingest your favorite meal. Okay. But on the contrast, there are certain kinds of pleasures that we experience that do not have correlating sensations. And these are psychic states. So you could be pleased that you read your favorite book. Or you could be pleased that you figured out the math problem. You are pleased that you heard your favorite song. Hearing your favorite song, figuring out the math problem, or reading your favorite book don't carry with them, prototypically, the same sensation of eating your favorite meal or drinking your favorite beverage or a back rub. But nevertheless, we understand it as pleasant. And this is how we contemporarily tend to understand pleasure. Pleasure is either a sensual feeling, the pleasure of eating my favorite meal or getting a back rub, or it is some kind of psychic state, being pleased that. And it takes a propositional form. So this is our contemporary understanding. Aristotle, this is even in the Hellenistic era as well, so it's not modern in any way, say. But Aristotle is going to have a different understanding of pleasure. For Aristotle, pleasure is a phenomenon that supervenes over proper function. So pleasure is what we call a supervening property. Now, what does it mean for a property to be supervenient? A property is supervenient. So let's look at this concept of supervenience. We may say that X is supervenient if and only if X occurs We may say that supervenience is X is supervenient if and only if X occurs in addition to the necessary and sufficient conditions of Y. So for example, here's a common theory of the mind, what Aristotle calls the suke. In a physicalist or materialist understanding of the mind, we understand the human mind, or the mind of non-human animals as well, to be physical. It's brain waves, it's electromagnetism, it's whatever. It's all physical stuff. But a supervenience theory of the mind says that when the human brain, so the squishy thing inside your skull, when the human brain is functioning correctly, as it should, when it is ticking all the necessary and sufficient conditions for proper function, then consciousness arises out of that. Consciousness is dependent upon a properly functioning, physically and biologically functioning human brain. That's a concept of supervenience. And Aristotle holds a very similar view of pleasure. Aristotle thinks that genuine pleasure supervenes over proper function. Now, naturally, as a result of this, pleasure is relative. Pleasure is relative to the kind of thing at hand. And Aristotle gives the example of a fox and a hare. A fox, or a hunting dog, experiences pleasure when it smells a hare. Why? Because foxes and hunting dogs eat hares. Okay? So as a result, when the fox or the hunting dog, when they smell the hare, the hunting dog is a better example because hunting dogs are trained to do specific tasks. But when the fox or the hunting dog smells the hare, and as a result is doing what it is designed to do by both nature and habituation, the hunting dog or the fox experiences pleasure. Now, if I brought in a hare right now to this room, and I had you sniff the hare, as awkward as that would be, you wouldn't experience any pleasure unless you're just genuinely weird. You wouldn't experience any pleasure by sniffing a rabbit. The reason you're not going to experience any pleasure by sniffing a rabbit is because your human function of rational self-governance and understanding has nothing to do with rabbits. You are not hunting dogs. As a result, smelling a rabbit is going to do nothing for you. But now flip it. What you can do as rational self-governing creatures is things like mathematics. So for example, when you do math, as annoying as you may find math, when you finally figure out the problem, you experience some kind of pleasure. Why? Even if it's the, yeah, I finally did it kind of pleasure. Why do you experience that pleasure? Because you are exercising your capacity, if we think about mathematics, for either nous, episteme, or Sophia. You are exercising one or more of these capacities. And as a result, it feels good, or it pleases you. You were pleased that you figured out your calculus homework. And this only can happen because you are properly functioning. My cat can never experience the pleasure of doing mathematics. And it is not the fault of my cat. The reason my cat can never experience the pleasure of doing mathematics is because that is not within the scope of what it is to be a cat. Remember this phrase we talked about, the essence, the to-te-ain, the what it is to be. What it is to be a cat has nothing to do with calculus. What it is to be a human being does encompass the possibility of calculus. Why? Because as a human being, you have from birth, as a first potentiality, the capacity for complex deductive reasoning. Okay? Now, once again, to kind of keep fleshing out this example, my cat likes to play with laser pointers, and my cat experiences great pleasure when he catches the red dot from the laser pointer. Why? Because that's within his totianani, what it is to be a cat. Cats are hunters. So when he catches the red dot on the laser pointer, he experiences pleasure. And pleasure supervenes over that proper functioning. It is because he caught the red dot and because he is exercising his capacity as a hunter that he experiences pleasure. If I shone a red dot on the floor, in front of you guys, it'd be really weird if you got pleasure in catching the red dot, right? It'd be like something is genuinely wrong with you because this is not what you do as human beings. But if by contrast, I gave you a complex problem to solve and you couldn't, and when you finally solved it, if you experienced no pleasure because of that, Aristotle would also think there's something wrong with you because this is the kind of thing you should get pleasure in. By contrast with the moral virtues, my cat experiences no pleasure when I put him on a diet. Why? Because one, I have to put him on the diet. He cannot elect to diet. But dieting or temperance, the instantiation of temperance, is not the kind of thing that cats are capable of. But you guys, as human beings, you do experience pleasure with the moral virtues. It feels good to be charitable. It feels good, or you are pleased that you do charitable things and you recognize them as charitable. It feels good, or it is pleasing that you help someone, you demonstrate kindness, you demonstrate bravery, what have you, whatever moral virtue in question. Why? Because this is proper human functioning. This is the world of genuine pleasure. So genuine pleasure supervenes over proper function. But remember, if you recall our chart, Aristotle does think that the vicious person is fully unified. And the vicious person experiences pleasure as well. But they experience, I'm going to put this as pleasure for the virtuous. The vicious person experiences what I will call pseudo-pleasure. Now, what is pseudo-pleasure? Pseudo-pleasure is, for Aristotle, this good feeling, okay? So the thief feels good when she steals. The murderer feels good when she kills. The arsonist feels good when she destroys via fire, okay? But these are not genuine pleasures for Aristotle. Pseudo-pleasure is marked by the feeling, but it is not genuine pleasure because it fails to supervene. It has nothing to do with proper human function. It has everything to do with pleasure. So the glutton feels pleasure when she eats way too much. The drunkard feels pleasure when she drinks too much. Okay, same thing with like the serial philanderer that you fill in the example yourself. These are pseudo-pleasures because they are marked solely by sensation. There is nothing to do with proper human function here. But this kind of pseudo-pleasure that the vicious person experiences, Aristotle thinks is in some sense akin to genuine pleasure, but it's wildly mistaken. Now, the rest of us, those that experience akrasia, all of us, whether we be continent or incontinent, we're somewhere in the middle. We feel really good about ourselves, or we experience pleasure when we figure out our calculus homework or our chemistry homework. We also feel good about ourselves when we help someone out, when we do kind and charitable acts. But we also feel really bad about ourselves when we can't figure out our homework. Or we feel really bad about ourselves when we get an F on our paper. We feel bad about ourselves when we know what we should have done. So when we know that we should have only eaten 2 slices of pizza, but we eat the whole pie. There's no world in which you should only eat 2 slices of pizza. Always eat the whole pie. But we feel bad about ourselves in that situation. Why? Because we know we are not doing what human beings are designed to do properly. We're failing to engage in our proper human function. Okay. So for Aristotle, the fully virtuous life, the life of the phronimos, it's a really pleasant life. Not only is she just hitting it out of the park with eudaimonia, but she's also constantly experiencing pleasure. But for the rest of us, we get it sometimes, we don't get it sometimes. The goal is to get it more times than not. Now, do not be confused. Pleasure is not the good. Pleasure is not the goal. We are not trying to be virtuous so that we experience pleasure. We try to be virtuous so that we experience eudaimonia. And a practical, perhaps a way we can, a heuristic for tracking eudaimonia is pleasure. But we need to be very careful that we don't fall into the pseudo-pleasure of the vicious. And Aristotle, when he talks about pseudo-pleasures of the vicious, he's going to give very weird examples. This example is the pleasure of looking at a corpse. He's like, think of it kind of like looking at a train wreck. Or we all do this. You're driving along the road, you see EMS, fire, rescue, and a cop. What are you going to do? You're going to slow down, and you're going to rubberneck. Why? Because you're nosy. You want to see what's going on there at the car crash. But it also is just kind of fun to look at these kinds of things. I don't know why, but it's this whole adage of like, it's like looking at a train wreck. You can't help but look away. For some reason, as human beings, we get some kind of sick pleasure of looking at like car wrecks and train wrecks or what have you. It's this, what the Germans call, or like watching someone get injured. There's a word for this in German called Schadenfreude. And like America's Funniest Home Videos or Fail Army, these kinds of things are just built off Schadenfreude, the pleasure of watching someone else experience pain. Aristotle thinks that these kinds of pseudo-pleasures, they're pleasure in name only. They're not genuine pleasures because they fail to instantiate the totiene nai, or the what it is, the essence of a pleasure. The essence of pleasure is supervenience. It is proper human functioning in action. Schadenfreude is not genuine pleasure. And we need to be careful we don't conflate the two. All right, we're going to pause there. Next time we talk about friendship.